everybody, this is Nishtha. As you know, I have a blog called dawnandhope.com, and I upload videos in YouTube about my blog posts and about the categories like self-care and travel. Starting today, from this week, I'll be doing science lessons, concepts in science that can be used by any student in any grade for science classroom. This can go from elementary to middle to high school students. A little background about me. I'm an educator and I've been teaching for 13 years. I've taught both middle school and high school science, and I've experienced in administration position also. So in addition to my blog, I am starting the science lessons on a weekly basis to help students. Now with the COVID and the remote instruction and online learning, I wanted to give back to the community, so I wanted to put my expertise, which is science knowledge, into practice by making videos that can be useful to students. This is lesson 1 for my first science concept video, and today we'll be talking about cells. Cell is a basic introduction all science students, especially biology students, need to know. So in today's lesson, which is cells part 1, we'll be talking about cells, cell theory, the 5 scientists and the timeline of the scientists for the cell theory, and a little introduction about the prokaryotes and the eukaryotes. For contacting me, of course, you're welcome to subscribe, like, and share my video. You can ask me questions in the comment section, or if you want to send me something personal, a question or a concern, my email is nishtha@dawnandhope.com. This is the basic unit of study. Going over the course of a year, I'll be covering these topics. The first unit is the cells, which I'm going to start on today, which will be in 3 parts for 3 weeks. Then the next unit is on body systems, and then stimulus and response, matter and energy within an organism, genetics, variations, the unit on plants, biodiversity, catastrophic events, and solar system. So each unit will be over a course of about a month, 3 to 4 lessons on a weekly basis for each of the unit. The first thing is, what do you know about a cell, or define a cell? This is the picture of a cell, and this is a living organism. So this is actually a bacteria, and you may know that bacteria is made up of only one cell. So bacteria is a single cell organism. A similar picture, this tells you a few of the structures found inside a single cell. You can see the outline of a cell wall, you can see a tail, which is called a flagellum, and a couple more structures inside. We'll be talking more about this towards the end of this video, and more in the part 2 of the cells. But this is a single cell organism, in this case bacteria. The definition of cell would be, it is a basic unit of function and structure in all living organisms. So what do you mean by structure, and what do you mean by function? Structure means what it is made up of, and function means what it does or what does it perform. So it is telling you here that this cell is the basic structure. It is what the living organisms are made up of, and the cell is the basic unit of function. So cell is the one that does the function or perform its duty in a living organism. The second concept is about the cell theory. So what is a theory in science? In science, a theory is a set of principles or ideas, or an explanation about something in the natural world that can be scientifically verified through repeated tests. So a theory is a step before the law. A law is something that has been proven, it is set in stone, and we just believe it to be true. A theory is something that has been verified. Multiple hundreds and thousands of tests have been done, and it all brings back to the same reasoning. But as a science student or a scientist, you can always question a theory, and you can do more tests and research about it. So you have that thing in theory that you can still argue about and try to solve it before it becomes a law, when it gets universal. So the cell theory has 3 components. Number 1 is all living organisms are made up of cells. Number 2, the cell is the basic unit of structure and function of a living organism. And number 3, all new cells are created from living existing cells. So number 1 is talking about all living organisms. In science, living organisms are also called biotic. Bio means living. So if there is a biotic factor, a living factor, then all living organisms are made up of cells. The example would be the single cell bacteria, like I was talking about in the picture earlier. The only organism that is single celled is bacteria, and there are many bacteria on the earth. In fact, they say that if you take the biomass and put bacteria on one side and all the living organisms on the other side, guess what? The bacteria biomass will be more than all other living things together. So basically, it is telling us that all living things are made up of cells. Number 2 is like the definition. The cell is a basic unit of structure and function of a living organism. So a living organism, what it is made up of and what it does, the performance is all dependent on each of its cell. Number 3 says all living cells are created from pre-existing cells. That means you cannot make a cell in a lab. From one cell, you can make tens and hundreds and thousands and millions and billions, but the first cell has to be coming from a pre-existing cell. As an example, just like the opposite of bacteria, which is one cell, the other kingdoms of living organism, which includes the protists, the fungi, the plants, and the animals, and of course we'll talk more about the classification later in one of the videos. All of these kingdoms of life are made up of cells. Human being, as an example, we are under the kingdom Animalia, and we are made up of 75 trillion to 100 trillion of cells. That means so many cells are inside our body. Of course, they're organized, and we'll talk about the organization of cells into tissues, into organs, into organ systems, and living organism. But that's something we are going to talk about in the next video in detail. Okay, who was the first scientist to see a cell? So now we know that all living things are made up of cells. But can you think that who was the first person or the first scientist to actually see a cell under a microscope? It was Robert Hooke in the year 1663. He actually was looking at the cork, and cork is a plant cell. So he was the first one to look at the little chambers. It looked like the monk rooms or the prison cells. So he was also the scientist to coin the word cell. So he named those things as cells. Same year, around 1663-1664, Anton van Leeuwenhoek, he observed the first animal cells. Well, now we know that those were the bacteria or the single cell organisms called protists. But in that time, there was only plant and animal kingdom. So he is designated as the first scientist to look at the animal cells. Did you know how he found the animal cells? He was looking in the gunk of the teeth. 200 years ago, there were not many oral hygiene, and people didn't have brushes and other ways to take care of their teeth. So when he was looking at the gunk of the teeth, he found the living things, the small animal-like structures. So he was the first scientist to see the animal cells. In 1838, Matthias Schleiden, a scientist, concluded that all plants are made up of cells. So between 1663 and 1838, many scientists, some in favor of Robert Hooke and some who didn't want to believe him, conducted their own independent research. But in 1938, Schleiden was the one to conclude that, yes, all plants are made up of cells. In 1839, Theodor Schwann, another German scientist, concluded that all animals were also made up of cells. The last scientist who was involved in the cell theory is Rudolf Virchow. In 1855, he concluded that all cells come from pre-existing cells. So before that, some scientists used to believe that there were spontaneous regenerations, that the cells could just come out of non-living, how they proposed about the earth formation and the life coming on the earth. But in 1855, Rudolf Virchow concluded that no, all cells or any cells, they have to come from pre-existing cells. Whether it is one cell or whether there are trillions of cells, they all carry out the following functions. The cell can control the reproduction and repair of cells. It controls the flow of chemical energy. It distributes and stores materials to create complex molecules. The cells assemble complex molecules to build new cell structures, and the cells are able to process, recycle, and dispose of waste. This is the last concept for the cells part 1 today. So introduction about the prokaryote cell and the eukaryote. If you look on the right side, the prokaryote is the cell we just saw a little while ago in the beginning of the slide. It is a bacterial cell. It's very simple. Prokaryotes do not have a nucleus. A nucleus is a cell organelle or a structure towards the center of the cell that contains the genetic material called DNA. But in a prokaryote, that is a bacterial cell, there is no nucleus. So prokaryotes do not have a nucleus. They're very simple and they are one-celled. Eukaryotes, on the other hand, are more complex. They are made up of many different organelles. As an example, mitochondria, nucleolus, ER, endoplasmic reticulum, and Golgi body, and more. We will learn more about it later. But eukaryote cells, they have a nucleus which contains the DNA. They are more complex, they are bigger, and they're made up of many cells, so they are multicellular. An example for eukaryote would be the plant cells and the animal cells, because we are more complex and we have more structures than the prokaryote or a bacteria. That brings to the end of this video, the first video on cells part 1. Today we talked about the introduction of a cell, the cell theory, the 5 scientists involved with the cell theory, and a little bit about the prokaryote and the eukaryote cell. In my next video, the cells part 2, will be talking more about prokaryote, eukaryote, the different cell organelles inside the cell, the prokaryote and the eukaryote, the function of these organelles, and how do they perform their functions. So they will be the next part coming up next week. I'll be uploading these videos on a weekly basis. In the meantime, if you have any questions or concerns, please comment below. Or as I shared earlier, my email is nishtha@dawnandhope.com. Okay then, till next time, you all take care. Bye. Also, I've made this quizlet about the concept of cells today that I've taught you. So if you want to take that quizlet, do some practice and tell me how you performed in the quizlet. The link is in the description. Okay, take care. Bye.